Kevin's point about the lawsuit, do you feel like it's weighing on this decision? Is it part of it? Maybe it's fair to say it's part of it, but maybe not a big part of it. I don't know. How would you answer that?
My understanding is one condition that we're moving forward with, looking at the alternative and upgrading to a C2 status. If we do that, then part of the settlement, which is going to be much sooner, would be if we do that and choose to do that, then they will continue on as the FBO. They already have 19 years right now. So if we don't upgrade to the C2 standards, they're still the FBO for 19 more years.
Oh. And they'll just keep suing.
And they'll, well, who knows? I mean, we can get sued by the FAA too.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to make a couple things understood, because I have studied this significantly. Why are you shaking your head?
No, we're not going to get sued by the FAA.
Okay, wait.
I mean, you throw that out there,
Why do we
but
sign grant assurances and contract obligations and then think the FAA will not hold us to those? In fact, the FAA documents, they have told us in letters, they will hold us to these standards we've committed to. Whether we want them to or not, want to do these, they will hold us to the standards of the airport. We are obligated to do that. And there's no reason to think that just because we say, no, we don't want to do it, that the FAA will say, oh, that's okay. You don't have to do it. Why? I'm talking. They would make an example of us.
Oh, good.
That's the whole point. The whole point of this airport, of a federally obligated airport, is for the FAA to address the traffic, the demands of airplane flights. I've read through releases of federal obligations and highlighted this. The FAA will not release their obligations to you unless you meet 4 criteria. The major considerations of granting approval of a release of a grant obligation is the reasonableness and practicality of the sponsor's request. So is it reasonable and practical? The effect of the request on needed aeronautical facilities. So is our request to not have a grant, get out of the grant assurance, is that going to meet the needed aeronautical facilities? The net benefit to civilian aviation. So if there's a benefit to civilian aviation, they'll let us out of the grant assurance. So closing the airport's not going to be a benefit to civilian aviation. And the compatibility of the proposal with the needs of civilian aviation. The whole point of the FAA grants is to continue civil aviation improvements.
but you said cancel the airport. That's not what we're talking
So let
about.
me get back to that, Tracy. What is the end goal? I really appreciate the county stepping up and saying, we'll give you some money. What is the end goal of that? It can only be 2 things. Close the airport someday, or just run the airport on our own cost, our own dime. There's no other goals to choose from. Keep the airport going or close it. Closing it is an impossibility. And places have tried. And in fact, Scott just sent me a news article this week about a judge saying, in Hamptons? Northamptons. You can't do that.
But Northampton,
I'm not.
sorry, I'm just.
Van Nuys, I just was reading about Van Nuys, they don't like the airport either. They have 300,000 operations a year. We have 12,000, they have 300,000. There's no way they can close their airport. So maybe we can attempt that, but we can't even attempt that unless we fund the airport ourselves for 20 years. And then we're out of the 20-year grant obligations, and then we can start talking about that. And Santa Monica has been working on that for 30, 40 years.
Property acquisition assurances.
Okay.
And the other thing is, I wrote in my letter, and it says right here, anything that the FAA has funded, property, is in perpetuity. We are held in perpetuity. And the first grant the CAA, before the FAA gave us, was in 1949. So we're held. Everything on that airport is federally funded. So I'm happy to help close the airport.
Nobody's talking about closing the airport.
So then you want to fund the airport forever. That's the only other option, Tracy. We fund it.
No, but that's what the letter from the county was talking about.
$500,000 isn't even close to funding the airport. That's what we might pay this year. Next year it'll be $4 million, and the next year it might be 1, and the next year it's 20.
But it's the backing of the county that protects.
That's enough. I'm going to bring this back up here again.
The county, I wrote that I would be happy if the county wanted to take over the airport and fund the airport, and everybody in this county gets to pay for it. That's fair, but that's a major cost, and I don't think we're going to get the support for more than 1,000 people the most.
And you know
You don't
what,
know that.
it's so interesting to me, it reminds me very much of the transmission line issue we had here.
Exactly,
right?
you guys went through that.
We clearly didn't want the transmission line, and the whole community was behind that, and then the community was divided on if we were willing to bury it. So what's interesting is when it comes to what we want and what we're willing to pay for, it can be quite different. So in my opinion, what Midway was saying with the letter and the county was saying, and Kendall, please, I don't want to speak for the county, so let me know if I'm overstepping, was as you're going through this master plan process and as we look at hard numbers, is this something that could potentially be carried? Would the taxpayers be willing to carry it? And it's, if I'm understanding it again, I don't mean to oversimplify, but I've been listening to this argument for over 5 years now and feel like I'm somewhat versed. It sounds like if we want to stay B2,
We're not B2.
right, if
you
we
wanna-
want to go back to B2, let me rephrase,
Well, we
and the FAA say we can't.
Let me clarify, if we don't want to upgrade the safety features to C2 standards,
Right,
we're
right.
still a C2 airport.
Right, right. So if we don't want to upgrade to C2 standards,
The FAA will not fund us any improvements at all. They told us that in a letter.
so in your master planning process, we're going to get some hard numbers. And the county's going to be able to say, yes, we want to help pay for this, let's don't do any safety standard improvements, or they're going to say, no, this is way more money than we thought, right?
So, yeah, yes.
So-
But let me
Okay.
put this on right now. So right now, between the FAA and UDOT, they will fund 95% of the capital and maintenance costs, equipment costs, 95%. Anything short of 95% puts the Heber City taxpayers at risk of having to fork it out. And so my question is, we can't even get a rat tax passed last year for $1 or $10,
Yeah.
and we're talking about potentially putting $100 on people's property tax bill.
We would double our property tax rate just to pay half of this 26 million. We only get $2 million a year in property tax. Over 20 years, that's 24 million. That doesn't even get half of what the estimated cost is, so. I don't know, there's no vote for this, that do that.
No, and I appreciate that we've got to look at some,
So if the 40,000 people in the county want to vote for it, I'm good with that.
I guess,
maybe another one, huh? Hey, Kevin?
I guess, again, I'm not speaking for the county and for myself. I think it's more of, at least what I'd like to see is, whatever those numbers are, rather than kind of, and I understand it's really up to the voters if they want to bear that cost. I understand that. And I understand that other things have failed. But nevertheless, just play along with a hypothetical. If the voters were to support that, and in terms of what those numbers eventually are, to keep it as a non-compliant C2, okay, is that something that the city of Heber would be willing to explore how to do that? I think, that's what I felt the letter, that's what I felt the letter was, and at least the one coming from Midway, that's what I felt, is rather than shut the door on it before we can explore whether that can actually be done, because if it could, I think everyone would all be happy.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to say one more thing and then I'll stop talking. I'm reading from FAA, Chapter 22, Releases from Federal Obligations. And we have federal obligations, right? We all agree. We've signed dozens of contracts. The non-aviation interest of the sponsor or the local community does not constitute an airport benefit that can be considered in justifying a release or disposal. There's nothing that, when we say we don't like the noise or we don't like the fumes, the FAA says, we don't care.
Yeah, they don't care.
So it's not that the council doesn't care, I absolutely care.
Yeah.
But I also care about telling all my citizens, I'm sorry, we just don't, a lot of people don't like the airport. We're raising your property taxes 100% next year so we can start funding this. And they're gonna not like that.
Can I ask, so one of the questions that popped into my head is based on something, Kevin, that you asked too. And I don't know who best to answer it, but had the airport, when C2 airplanes started landing, had the airport said, oh, sorry, you can't land here, is that an option? Could that have happened? Could that have prevented all of this?
No.
Okay, so the airport, I'm seeing some heads and I'm seeing some.
It'd be like saying,
Yeah.
The answer's no.
it'd be like saying you can't drive down Midway Road because your car's too big,
Got
or
it.
your car's too fast,
So-
or your
Mayor.
car's
Because
this.
it's a public road.
It's a public road.
So then,
Mayor?
well then, to your point, then what happens if a D, I don't know what kind of plane that is, but if they started landing, could they?
Yes.
And could that potentially create a situation then where this would have to be upgraded as Kevin asked?
So let me, and please help me on this one, Travis and Jeremy. So there are some limiting factors to larger aircraft coming in here on a greater number.
Okay,
First is the thickness of the runway.
okay,
Second is the length of the runway.
okay.
Third is the mountain range that sits to the southwest of the runway. No ILS system, instrument landing system, no precision system. And probably most importantly is we're not a Part 139 airport, which means that we have scheduled passenger service. This council said we're never going to have that as far as we can control that, and they can have complete discretion over that. And so the big difference between Heber Airport and say Aspen or Kitchen and those others is they're a Part 139 airport, which means they have scheduled passenger service. We do not, and for being future, we're not going to.
Okay, okay, thank you, that answers that.
Mayor,
Scott?
just real quick, just to try and put into perspective in terms of what the cost would be, and I'm not suggesting these are the costs, but if you simply took let's say it's $1.5 million every year, right?
I get that number.
Well, 500 was thrown
But
out in
Kevin,
capital
I
improvements.
think we've established that they're willing to consider getting us hard numbers and then maybe putting it to the voters once we have hard numbers.
I understand, I just want to try and put perspective, I'm not suggesting
Yeah.
this is the number, because it was mentioned that, property taxes would double. $1.5 million, and at the county meeting where the tax appeals were discussed, it was mentioned about 26,000 or approximately 25 parcels that are taxed.
We're talking Heber City taxes, not.
No, we're talking all the county. The entire.
When he said double, we're talking Heber City.
Understand. So, but the entire county, $1.5 million divided by 26,000 is almost $58 a year. So if it's 3 million, then it's 116 or something. I'm just saying that in terms of perspective, that yes, these numbers are significant, and it is an issue that ultimately the voter is going to have to accept. But I'm just trying to put into perspective that it's not going to be a doubling of property taxes.
It's a
or
doubling
it
of
may
Heber
not.
City's property tax.
So only if it's,
Our property tax is
unless it becomes a county burden, it's.
Right.
I'm only talking about a county burden.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about a Heber burden. I'm
Yeah.
talking about,
So the other question is,
Yeah.
if this becomes a county burden, is the county expecting to have some control of the airport?
that's the
Yeah.
county.
If they're not a sponsor, they can't have control, and that's a violation of grant insurance.
And then taxpayers would be paying taxes, and it would do zero change on the jets. It would be exactly the same as it is, but you'd have that for 20 or 30 years.
Okay.
This case in Northampton was really interesting because the FAA had already released Northampton from obligations after waiting for 20 years, and it became a private airport. And the federal judge said, you still can't limit operations at the airport, and that was what they were trying to do. So if the end game is limiting operations at the Heber Airport, that's where we're like, we don't see a way to do that. There's no legal way to limit operations. You can't say who lands and who doesn't. NetJets, all of the shared ride leaders, all the shared rides already will not land here at night. Big part of that is there's no ILS system, and that is not part of the C2 enhancement.
We don't have to do that.
We don't have to do that.
Okay.
The only D airport in the state of Utah is Salt Lake City. We are not going to be Salt Lake International Airport.
And that's what I mean when I say there's no statistical data to support it. You know, I'm just trying to give you the science answer there. There's nothing to support that. But could they, you know, hypothetically, potentially, somewhere? Yes, the answer is yes. But there's nothing to support that.
I just want to wrap up, and I know Yvonne might have something to say. We have a gentleman here that's saying, you're not listening, the public says we don't want an airport. I think it's important for the public to do their homework, to do the research, to understand the complexity of this, because it's very difficult when they say, we don't want the airport, it's noisy, it's loud, and that's it. And they walk away saying, you're not hearing me. Because this is a complex issue. It's been 2 years in the master plan, it's been 5 years under litigation. These are difficult issues, and we can't just say, we hear you, and you're right, we don't like it either, because we have a responsibility. A fiscal responsibility, a legal responsibility to make a decision based on the information and the facts that we have in front of us.
I think you perhaps aren't giving enough credit to the populace in terms of whether they're smart or not. I'm late to the party. I think his...
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to cut you off
I'm
because...
gonna address the issue that was just pointed to me. You have one council member back there who says says the planes are gonna come. One council member actually stumbled upon something that could solve the issue.
For the record, I'm not a council member.
Sorry, again, new to the party. This airport started out at B and it was X length. And at some point it went to C because it was longer and you say C's can come in. What if that little landfill thing that's all rubbery down there can't be filled in and you have to take off half of the runway?
So that's a brilliant question.
So the point is, I'm not saying that that's a solution, but I'm just wondering if there weren't considerations given to alternatives, because it sounds like these proposals are all to fulfill FAA, which your third point of the four that you outlined there, Mike, said civilians, but isn't there a responsibility to the citizens here which elected you? There, I'm done.
If I may,
Yes,
this is a great point. I'd like to, just a second, if I may, to address the issue regarding the landfill. Actually, Yvonne.
She's going to
Oh, come on in, let's do your question. You've been standing so patiently. I'm so sorry. I'll get back to your question. Yvonne, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, finish your...
She's got to do a biology break.
Go ahead.
So understand the master plan is a broad, high-altitude plan for the airport. It's getting into some detail, but not the detail that you get into if you started doing some of the improvements that we talked about earlier. So after the master plan is accepted by the city and the FAA, we still have to go through what's called an environmental impact statement. And that process may say exactly what you said. You know, this taxiway's on the landfill, I'm sorry, you can't do anything about it, which means we've got to relook at that and figure out how it's going to work without it. And so the master plan, again, is just a high altitude plan, but the details come into play when we start looking at specific improvements and going through that environmental impact statement, because that's going to tell us a lot more about the details of what we might have to contend with.
Correct.
I also think it's important that we remember that the reason the runway is longer and we have these jets is because we asked, and we waited 15 years and we bought property over and over and over. So it wasn't one mayor or one city council. This has been since the 70s. They said, we want jets. We specifically, in their master plan, said, we want the jets that are going to Provo and Salt Lake to come here because we want them to buy fuel and enhance our community. Well, if you take 20 years of federal funding with the intent and telling them, we want this, they didn't ask us to do it, we asked to do it. We spent 20 years and $20 million getting all these jets here, and it started working. It worked great, it worked better than we wanted. Well, now, you can't just say, well, now we don't want to do anything. And we have to expect, if you want to get out of that, it's going to take 20 years and tens of millions of dollars.
Yvonne, thank
So
you.
just to clarify though, but that wasn't the citizens that asked for those larger jets. That was just a few handfuls, so.
No, but there was no complaints. You go back and listen to the
No,
public
there was
meetings.
complaints because I was
there
in one of
was.
those meetings, yes. And back in the day, the citizens were absolutely against it. It was a decision that was just made without the citizens.
And then
They were
and then
ignored.
60 city councilors and mayors just went along with it for 15 years?
Yeah, Pretty much.
Yep.
So,
But here's my question.
okay, Yvonne, go ahead, please.
Here's my question. Considering, my thought is that, first of all, I appreciate the work, and I want everyone to understand.
Please
What
keep your
Rachel,
comments quiet
what
while
Rachel
someone's
has
speaking.
said is true. This is not an easy decision. Mike's done a lot of work, everybody's done a lot of work, okay? It's not something that we sat down and said, hey, let's take care, it's something that was dropped on them previously, and now with Scott and I there too. So it's not something that everyone's standing up there going, we really want this airport, this is going to be so much fun. So please understand that. But I do have some concerns. They know I have concerns. They know that I said no, I voted no because of those concerns. So we've already established one that is pertaining to what the county is willing to do. They're willing to help us. But we also realize too that it needs to take the citizens to vote on this. And I think it's important that we, going forward, that's something that the city council, we need to address. That
Sounds
if
like you
they're-
guys are willing to.
Yes,
Okay.
if we are willing to listen to the citizens throughout the county, and if the county's saying, yeah, we're on board, great. But then I have a concern. Something that was brought up with our meeting on October 17th was Daniel City. And their concern in that we are infringing upon potential commercial land for them. If that's the case, is that something as we're going forward, and I'm trying to address a question, some of the questions that have been brought up on Facebook, but they're good questions. If that is an issue, how do we deal with that? You know, they're part of the county with a, and I've asked Kendall this, and he's not really giving me an answer on it, but as part of the county, is that something that they might say, hey, we're not going to help you out, the citizens of Daniel are not going to help you out because you're taking land from us that is going to benefit us commercially, potentially benefit us commercially. And then also the issue of those farmers and individuals who already, we know, are in the safety zone. You know, what about giving them the money that they need to go forward if they do decide to move? We don't want to push them out, so therefore, would the county and everyone else be willing to give them the amount that is not only for the land that they have, but to give them so they can go someplace else with the same size and the same footprint and everything else. So those are my two questions, and I guess this would be for the county. I mean, how would we address that? How would we take care of that problem?
So
And is that something that?
I really appreciate both those questions, Yvonne. I don't mean to cut you off, but I think we're back to the master plan is going to look at what kind of land is required
That's what I
and
wanted-
how
that's what
much
I
would
wanted
that
to say.
cost? And therefore, we would have those numbers if it were to go to a ballot. From Daniel's,
I
please.
guess I'll be the only one here from Daniel. This whole plan that they've approved all assumes that they can take the ground that's going to be in this new safety zone, that they can buy that ground. That's not a valid assumption. If those guys don't want to sell it, you guys don't have the ability to take that ground. Right? So, because you're inside of Heber City, Heber City can do whatever they want inside of Heber City's property. But once you cross that line into Daniel, all bets are off.
So for the record, they want to be clear that they
So
know and
you-
understand that?
Our mayor sent you guys a letter this last week, just like Midway sent a letter that said, we're opposed to this because it steps on not only those people's property, but it steps on what we have planned as our commercial zone.
So to be